Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is, wherever you are. My name is Aneesh de Vos, and apart from our very amazing guest, which I'm a tad excited about today, we have got the most gorgeous, the most ponderful, the most fabulous guy that I have ever drawn breath near. And I'm hamming it up, everybody, because this is our last one of this season, and we'll be back sometime in September because a very lovely professor told me last year, nobody should work in August. And we're not going to. So, David, ignoring Nora the cat, who is scratching her claws on my bed, David, how are you and how are you feeling at this being the end of the season?
I'm like you say, no one should work in August. I do. I will miss doing this, however. Even your wonderful introductions I shall miss. It means I won't have to probably roll an eye quite so much or tut so often.
And we forgot the drum roll.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So, enough of you, David. Your fans will be there, ready and waiting for September. We have got a rather exciting guest, and the reason that I'm very excited about this guest is because he will bring with him something that makes my spine tingle. It is the C word of compassion. So, John, you are apparently, you have told me, a psychologist and a psychotherapist, but you're also a little bit special and bring something a little bit unusual with compassion, and that is compassion in forensics. John, tell us what you do, because that's what we would all like to know today.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm very good at them. It's my job.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here as well. So I guess the bland description of what I do is just to say that I have two jobs. Neither of which, I have to say, will allow me to not work during August. So, I'm a little bit envious already of this kind of like, I want a t-shirt that says nobody should work in August. So I work part-time in a community forensic mental health team. I'm very new into that role. So I guess I'm finding my feet there. And then I work part-time in a prison, but I've pretty well spent my entire career moving between prison probation settings and secure hospital settings. So I've been where I should be, many people would say, I think, for the last 30 odd years. So yeah.
Why choose a path like that? What is it about you that made you think, well, I know, that's what I'm going to do? I mean, did you grow up with that longing to do that? Because it is, it is a real definite choice, isn't it?
I think I've got different narratives, I think, that kind of explain my kind of migration into a helping profession, for want of a better phrase, and then into forensic practice. And I guess the superficial narrative is that I remember many years ago, I won't go into details here, but I'd left home and gone away to university, and I didn't last very long at university. I was invited to reconsider my choice that I'd made, and that maybe I'd be better off considering a different career path. And whilst I was pondering what that career path may be, I took up a part-time job on a building site, and I remember that I was only young, and it was mainly young guys there, and certainly talking for myself, not particularly reflective, not particularly thoughtful about difference, not particularly tolerant, all those kind of things. And there used to be a number of people who used to walk past the building site, and I didn't really know this at the time, but I guess I realized fairly soon after that these were people who must have lived in some kind of group home, protected, sheltered accommodation. So either people perhaps with learning disability, or people with long-term mental health difficulties, something like that. And whenever they walk past, most of the guys on the building site just took the piss, just really kind of, you know, said lots and lots of things. And I remember finding it uncomfortable, you know, and perhaps laughed to my shame first time, but then the more it happened, the more uncomfortable I felt. And actually, and it kind of stimulated me to start to think about, well, maybe what I could do with my life is do something that does offer some kind of support, help, something to people who are experiencing some kind of disadvantage, you know. So that was it. That was the kind of pathway into working in mental health, I guess, was to go away and train to do that job. And I trained originally as a nurse, and then trained in psychotherapy pretty quickly after qualifying as a nurse. And then very quickly in that role, I remember working in a service where we kept receiving referrals for people who were getting themselves into all sorts of bother, you know, breaking the law, odd referral from probation service saying, we don't know what to do with this person, can you come and help? And that kind of opened the door for forensic kind of work, really, which I hadn't really considered. I think, if I'm honest, it felt a little bit sexy to work with, you know, kind of the bad boys, if you like. So it had an appeal to me in that sense, you know. So that's the kind of superficial narrative. I think I remember an early supervisor of mine saying, "What's a load of tosh? There's something in your early life that's pushed you down this pathway, you know." And I'm sure she had a point to some degree. So yeah, that's how. And I thoroughly enjoy it.
Fantastic. And there is something about this, and David and I have discussed this many times, certainly on Community Connections, haven't we, that, you know, invariably in the helping professions, we are there because there is something, you know, about our own past that has pushed us forward into that. Would you agree with that still, David? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's a mixture of there but for the grace, etc., and starting off in a hopeless place, finding out that there is a way out. Yeah. And I think you get to that place where you want to pass it on. You know, it feels good, and why wouldn't everybody else want to experience the way you feel? Yeah, having pushed through, worked on, come out the other end, all those expressions, having done that. Yeah, it's wanting to give sounds another one of those cliches, but you know where I'm coming from.
Yes, I do, and I think you've explained it beautifully. John, how does compassion get into forensics? You know, there's going to be people watching this that are, you know, going to be throw away the key, you know, why should we? How much of the taxpayers' money, etc., etc., etc. I know you and I have spoken before about this, but tell us, how does compassion come into forensics? How do you bring it in?
I think there's a number of ways. Actually, I think that the first thing is compassion for me is based. My interest in compassion is based very much on Paul Gilbert's work. So the Compassionate Mind Foundation, compassion focused therapy, and that's very much based on a definition of compassion that sees compassion as a motivational state, not as a feeling in itself. It can recruit different emotions, but it's a motive, and it's a motivation that is about being prepared to notice the distress that people are experiencing or the suffering that people might experience, and then being motivated to try to prevent or alleviate that suffering. So that's what compassion is. And I think immediately when you kind of say that out loud, you start to think, well, that must have a role in forensic services, because if nothing else, people in forensic services need to develop that capacity in themselves so that they don't cause harm, you know. So I think my original interest was based on that kind of mentality for myself, that this just sounds like exactly what we need to be working on with people who've caused harm. Yeah. I guess what I've appreciated more and more over the last 10 years or so, I guess, since I've been playing about with CFT and forensic settings, is also becoming more and more ready to notice the suffering that sits in the background of a very significant number of people who commit violent sexual crimes, who cause that kind of harm in other people's lives. And I certainly remember the first time I worked in a prison, a chap, putting his arm kind of around my shoulders. I wasn't quite sure what he was going to do at the time. I'd only been there about 3 days, and him just saying very gently to me, very broad Scottish accent that he had. He said, I can't imitate. I'd love to be able to imitate the Scottish accent now, but I'm not even going to try because I'm going to make myself look stupid. He said, I hope you learn quickly, John, that this is that this is an adult care home. That where we are right now is an adult care home, and what we need is care. And I kind of laughed it off at the time, thought it was a bit of a joke, and actually they were words of wisdom, because when you start to inquire into people's lives, you realise pretty quickly that the level of trauma in people's backgrounds in forensic services is very, very substantial. And when you compare adverse childhood experiences, for example, in general population compared to forensic populations, there's a huge difference, So actually, I guess for me, compassion in forensic services starts with noticing the trauma in people's lives before they became traumatizing in their own right, and working with that. I have a very, very strong belief now that people shouldn't be invited to do, for example, work around their offending behaviour until they've had the opportunity to work on their own trauma, their own adversity. And not everybody wants to do that, which is fine if people don't choose to do it. But I think people should be offered the opportunity that anybody else would. And that's very different to traditional forensic practice, where people were always invited to, you come in to a prison to work on your offending behaviour. You'll do an offending behaviour programme. And again, to my shame, I've been involved in this kind of work long enough to remember, times when people would disclose early life trauma and would be told, well, we can't talk about that here. We're here to talk about your crime. Don't you use that as an excuse, kind of thing. So it's certainly shifting the landscape in that sense for me, to support people to engage in a meaningful therapeutic process that's meaningful for them, in terms of their life experiences, and not just getting stuck with this identity where you're a prisoner, you're an offender, you're a patient, that kind of stuff. So for me, that's where compassion comes in.
It's really powerful, isn't it? That, like you're saying, that older methods, and I'm hoping that those methods are diminishing pretty quickly. I'm really hoping that they are, and certainly talking to people like you are coming into this quite differently. But it's really powerful, isn't it, when you think that there are high numbers of people that are, have traumatized from their backgrounds and then go on to offend, etc., that you actually, and I know we perhaps overuse it, but that you're basically saying what happened to you, because people don't just pop up and be a violent offender, do they? Again, it's not like, well, when I'm big, I think I'm going to do that. There has to be something that is deep. I always talk about this deep wound. There has to be this deep wound. In the majority of cases, I'm going to open it to argument that sometimes maybe not, but in the majority, in a high majority of cases, that there would be a wound, because we don't sit there and think, I'm going to go and do something that's really quite heinous and abhorrent.
I think there's a combination of influences. I think one of the things that we're perhaps reluctant to acknowledge as people is that actually we do have the capacity to hurt other people.
We do.
And actually it sits within all of us. That, nature, biology, evolution, however you want to frame it, we have been given the capacity to cause harm, and we can do that directly, men particularly, in terms of throwing punches, because men tend to have more physical power. You know, that's something that becomes accessible more readily, perhaps, for men. But we also have creative imaginations, which means we can think of all sorts of interesting ways of trying to cause harm to each other. And we're probably the only species that do that. You know, we invest an awful lot of money in making sure we can hurt a neighbouring state should we wish to do so. So I think part of certainly CFT within forensic settings is starting to acknowledge that, you know, I have this capacity within me to cause harm. I was fortunate enough as I was growing up to learn how to manage that.
Yeah.
You know, what a shame you didn't have those opportunities to learn how to manage that. And then I think you're right, Aneesh, that people can certainly have some experiences that change the trajectory of their development, you know, and we know now from, you know, lots and lots of trauma-based work that the way the brain matures, the way our synaptic pathways grow as we are, you know, waking our way through our childhood, that is influenced very significantly by the social environment that we're growing up in. You know, so whatever the synaptic connections, you know, at the end of childhood that are sitting within the skull, they're the ones that were best suited to the environment somebody grew up in. You know, so if my synapses are ready to create some kind of dissociative state, that's because they needed to be developing in that manner. And if my synapses are unable to hold attention and give me energy, then they needed to be like that. I think that's part of the kind of approach that the compassion brings into forensic settings, that rather than disordering.
Yes, don't disorder. We don't disorder.
No, it's not. I mean, I'd actually go as far as to say that almost everything that we've talked about in psychiatric categories and in forensic psychology in terms of criminogenic influences, these are not deviant, disordered things. They can be dangerous, they can be harmful, but actually they're a product. They're a human product, you know, and just maybe if you put me, Paul Gilbert always uses a little story where he talks about if he were kidnapped by a Colombian drug gang, the version of Paul Gilbert that developed CFT probably would never have existed. And I certainly say to my clients, kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek sometimes, if Fred and Rosemary West had been my parents, I doubt I would have ended up as a psychologist. You know, I would probably have ended up, you know, living in a prison or a secure hospital, because of the capacities that they would have nurtured within me. You know, so I guess that's another bit of compassion. One bit of compassion in forensics is let's start to notice that the adversity that has been in people's lives, and actually let's pay attention to that. You know, it's no good just noticing. We have to then allow people the opportunity to work on it. And let's stop disordering. Let's stop othering people. Let's recognise there's a common humanity. And David used the phrase earlier, there but for the grace of God, actually.
Yeah.
It's actually an exercise I do with guys quite often, is say, if you could give me 3 of the experiences from your life and I could live them for you, what difference would that make to your life and what difference would it make to mine? Where would we both be now? And people are often, you know, quite bowled over by that when they start to think, God, so if that stuff hadn't happened to me, then my pathway might have been different. Yeah, might have been.
In a very simplistic way, and I'm all for the simple. So in a very simplistic way, I know when I'm working with people, and no, I'm not working in a forensic setting, but I know when I'm working with people, I dismantle them in a way. I say, you are a biological being, and your only job is to survive.
Yeah.
So let's nip out God, excuse me. Let's nip out, you know, any philosophy. Let's nip out any spirituality. Let's shove that right to the ends of the earth, and let's look at you. You are a little chemical box, and your aim is to survive. And you will survive depending also on the environment around you. So is it, and they're like, oh, right, yeah, actually. And I said, and then you will create these behaviours that are reflective of the influences around you. So quite frankly, if you're getting the proverbial kicked out of you, it is likely that there is a part of you that knows how to kick the proverbial out of people too. Because maybe at sometimes in your life, to protect yourself, because you're always sitting in that threat system, you have kicked the proverbial out of somebody. There, by the grace of God, go I. But we then come to the, do you want to keep doing that, or do you want it to be different? And I think with giving somebody that choice and that opportunity to see that it can be different. Have I simplified it too much? I mean, is that not what you're doing in forensics in some way? Never set foot in a forensic situation, but I'm just wondering.
No, I think it is. I think all therapy invites people to be curious about themselves, doesn't it? And to particularly to be curious about, you know, what are my defences? You know, what have I put in place to protect, and what am I protecting from? And you know, as you were saying, Aneesh, then if you're growing up in an environment where violence is the main currency, then learning to be violent might be really important.
Really helpful.
Might be the only thing that will get you through. So I guess part of, and this is a strap line that's I think caused some anxiety in forensic settings to start with. One of the things that CFT is quite well known for is this idea that, you know, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you came to be the way that you are, but it is your responsibility to then to manage that. Now that you notice this stuff, we have to manage it. Now, I mean, I've been very fortunate, I think, in forensic settings. So I have a colleague, Karenza, her name is, who I work with quite closely to develop CFT in forensic settings. And fortunately, she's quite an organised, efficient senior psychologist. So she's got all the qualities that I don't have, because I'm not very organised at all. And one of the things that we kind of worked quite hard on together was supporting people to, I don't know, dismantle is too strong. There's an invitation to self-dismantle, maybe, in terms of one of a phrase that's used in forensic settings a lot is this idea of risk factors, or dynamic risk factors, or criminogenic need is another way of describing it. And then,
for a layperson, what does that mean, John? Because we're not all forensic psychologists.
These are aspects of a person's repertoire that increase the probability of causing harm, you know. Okay. So, and they can be different things. I mean, an obvious one, for example, might be somebody who has a sexual interest in young people. Yeah. So that is part of that person that can be highly dangerous, you know, if they don't manage that. You know, impulsivity, you know, people who, you know, if people take drugs, that can increase the probability of harm. So there's a whole range of factors. And these have always been listed in forensic services as kind of, well, these are parts of you that are bad, and we just have to figure out how to get rid of them or how you manage them. And I guess part of the compassionate approach, and this is the bit that I think fits with what you were just talking about in terms of dismantling, is helping people to be curious about, where did this come from? Where did this come from? You know, and now for some of those things, you know, it might be quite a biological thing, a genetic thing, you know, that, you know, it may be that sexual interests, for example, are influenced by genetic factors. You know, there may be some environmental stuff that can influence as well, you know. But people don't choose to have these. You know, so I didn't choose to have this stuff. So that's a really important bit. And I think one of the things that we found is supporting people to understand the origins of these parts of themselves, where they came from, their role in generating them, and often they didn't have much of a role in generating these parts of themselves, actually allows people to work on them, because suddenly they don't feel weighed down by this shame of thinking I'm a collection of badness. You know, I'm just a, you know, I'm not a bag of bones and DNA. I'm a bag of badness, and actually that makes it hard to work on stuff. So actually, if I start to understand, you know, that when I developed this belief system because of the environment I was growing up in, or I developed that way of relating to people, you know, I developed that style of attachment, all of those kind of things, you know, I developed these because I had to. And that just, my personal experience is that is quite liberating for people, because then they feel like, wow, that means I can work on this now, because I don't feel burdened by it. I don't feel weighed down anymore.
It sounds very accepting as well. What do you think, David? This sounds like you as a therapist, John, are saying, I'm going to accept you for what you are and what you've done. I'm going to accept you as that.
Yeah, I think we're clear about, we're clear about there are behaviours that we are going to take a view on, and we're going to, it's not okay to do this. It's not okay to do that. It's not okay to do that. But actually, if I condemn you, then I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to help you at all. So I almost think sometimes that there's if you like, the core conditions of therapy. If Carl Rogers saw forensic psychology, he'd be appalled. Could be like, where are these core conditions? Well, those need to be part of it. If we want people to change, we need to put the ingredients in that support people to change, and that means tolerating, accepting, having some compassion for people, all that kind of stuff.
David, I'm going to flip that over to you, being the person centered. I'm going to let you go back with that one.
Back to me. Knowing full well that CFT is very much your bag, so to speak, Aneesh.
I do love a bit of CFT.
Yes, you do. And person-centered being my, if you like, background, my bag. Yeah, what always comes, there were several things I wanted to ask Jon along these lines, but one of them sticks out for me is that there's a backlash against what you're doing, what I consider is the right thing to do, but many would consider it quite the opposite. And you're right, what you say is there's a condemnation of an awful crime, the ones that you deal with, is particularly sexual offences against young people, children. So you're working very much against the grain. And I don't think you can adopt the sort of moral stance on this if you do what you're doing. And I'm just wondering how you handle that. What that's the wrong way to put it. What does it mean to you, the sort of adverse reaction you might get to what you do?
I guess in a way I understand it. I think I understand where it comes from. I can be frustrated by it sometimes. I've had many people say to me during my career, friends, family members, why do you do that? Why do you work with those people? And I kind of think, and maybe my explanation's changed over time, but I think, the way our society operates is these people, as you refer to them, not you two, I mean, the people who you say to, will come out. They'll come out of prison, they'll come out of hospital. So actually we have an obligation to offer them the support, the intervention even, that will enable them to live a harm-free life, or at least maximise that possibility that people will come out of prison or come out of secure services and be able to live in a lifestyle that facilitates them or keeps them away from causing more harm. I think we have an absolute duty to do that. I think, so I think that's my answer in a way.
My thought. I appreciate it. Thank you. My take on it was that you're actually, if you don't, you're actually condemning someone twice, aren't you?
Yeah, and if we start to take that view that once people have done certain things, then they are unredeemable. Where do you draw the line? What is is it child murder? Is it child sexual offending? Is it what about? And you hear this, there's a hierarchy of stuff in prisons often, that it's okay to kill a man, it's not okay to kill a woman, and it's certainly not okay to kill a child. You think that's a bizarre value system in itself, I think. So, but I say the legal system we have, people come out. So I think we have a duty to support. And I do think, I mean, if I get political for a moment, and I promise,
please do. We're very arsy.
I promise I'll keep it brief.
Oh, go on. We love it.
Well, I think the way that criminality is presented and is talked about in the media is completely inaccurate. I think the way judges sentence, and they always come up with this kind of, they'll do a speech at the end of a trial, and you know, Mr. Taylor, arise, you know, you are an evil kind of, and it's like, this is utterly unhelpful stuff, because they're buying into almost a, you know, a Frankenstein narrative that there are good people and bad people, and there are people, and some people, there may be genetic weightings that means some people are more easily taken down a pathway towards harmfulness. You know, but a lot of this is about people have terrible lives.
Yeah.
You know, people live in poverty, people live in abusive and negligent environments, people experience discrimination, and that is what traumatizes people, you know.
Yeah.
And actually what responsible politics and responsible journalism would do would be to talk about that and actually address some of that stuff, instead of just allowing some people. The guy that put his arm across my shoulder and said, you need to realize this is an adult care home, he was right, you know. And you know, he should be informing Boris about criminal, you know, prison policy. And you know, every election you'll hear this new kind of wave of kind of, well, we just need to lock people up for longer and we need harsher sentences. No, we don't. We need to treat people with decency, because that's what will help people to, if people can experience it, if people can experience compassion, can experience kindness, can experience tenderness, can experience love, you know, not that you'll get that in a prison, but then maybe they can start to communicate that and pass that on, you know.
Yeah, because we are, you know, I would say, you know, when we're little, the world around us shapes us, and then that creates our view as we become older to the outside world, and indeed creates our view of ourselves as well. And if, you know, if you keep treating people as subhuman and you keep othering people, but then you don't do it on that group because that's all right, you know, and if we keep doing that, then actually we're not going to get very far, are we? And, you know, if you look back historically, actually, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant, we've actually never got very far. We're still running around, going into other people's countries and killing them. We just do it really cleanly now with a button and a drone. So we're still doing that. And I think that, going back to what you were saying earlier, we're human and we can do some really horrific things. And that is actually part of being human, because it's actually part of a survival mechanism as well. But it's also part, some people then get disjointed and it becomes pleasure as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think what I'd like to say off the back of John's reply to my question was that, you know, and I think this applies to therapists at different levels of where they're at in their profession, is that probably the most difficult thing to do from a person-centered point of view, which is essential to person-centered therapy, to doctrine, is you can despise, vilify the crime. But, you know, the lesson is to treat the person. And I know it's something that took me a long time for me to get my head around, but it needs to be there. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think there's something for me about, I remember quite early in my career being on some training, and the training facilitator inviting all of us on this course just to think a little bit about, you know, under what conditions we might kill somebody. And it was interesting because the parents in the room had absolutely no trouble thinking about that.
Yeah.
You know, very, very quickly, protection of my babies, you know, I absolutely will kill to stop them being harmed, and would happily be killed, you know, in that process if it's protecting them. And so people didn't really struggle with that. The trainer then invited people in the room, and the men in the room particularly, to consider under what conditions we would rape. Nobody could get in touch with that at all. And then the trainer just very casually pointed out that, you know, in wartime, for example, you know, the prevalence of rape goes up. Until 1992 in the UK, rape was legal within the context of marriage. So a husband could force his wife to have sex, you know. So, you know, men have legitimized, you know, the Me Too, hashtag Me Too stuff recently, you know, men have legitimized sexual violence as well as physical violence, societies have done that kind of stuff. So again, it's recognizing that sits within us, doesn't it? And I think part of that kind of, I can have an opinion about a crime, and I can judge the crime, and I can condemn the crime.
Yeah.
But I can work with the person, because I recognise that actually there is this capacity, and I'm lucky that I learnt to manage that capacity, and some people don't get that opportunity.
That statement is that is compassion, isn't it? That recognition that in actual fact, I am as capable as the next person, of course, varying different reactions, but that you got the chance to, manage that through the environment that you're brought up in, through the decisions that you've made as you've grown in age, and that some people actually don't. And that's when you really sit down and think about it, that is an incredibly forceful concept. It literally makes me go like that some people don't get that.
Yeah, I worked in an environment once where we, this was in a secure hospital setting, we worked quite closely with the men who were living in one particular environment in the hospital. So we used to do some kind of collaborative research with them, and once a month we used to have a research meeting. We have regular focus groups, and there are different topics that we explored over time. But one of the topics we were interested to explore was how you help a group of young men in a single sex environment have a healthy sex life. How do you express that part of you? How do you express your sexuality when you're detained, when you're locked up, and everybody you're living with is the same gender as you? And there was some interesting envy from straight guys towards their gay peers, who, because they was actually you can experience some sexuality and we can't. But what was most interesting was one of the younger guys, who's only 19, said to me, he said, "You just don't get it, do you, John?" I said, I don't, what is it I don't get? Help me figure this out. He says, maybe we need to experience a period of our life that is free of sex, because we didn't get that when we were little. So we brought ourselves into an environment where sex is absent, because we've never had that. And you think, oh God, wow, wow.
And that is such an empowering statement, isn't it? That realization of choice. I mean, hell of a place, to find yourself in a prison to have that realization of choice. But for somebody that has experienced, sexual abuse within childhood, especially if it's in familial settings, because let's face it, actually, it happens more in the family than it does out in the stranger danger. But in actual fact, that choice and that right of choice of a person, and once they realise that, that's really quite beautiful. I'm just sad that it's, that they found that they could make that choice within a forensic setting. Yeah,
it's amazing what you can learn from people who end up living in forensic settings if you can sit down and spend the time to listen, because they sometimes think if we could have service user groups and forensic services who design the services, maybe the rehabilitative impacts would be much greater than they are currently, because I think we'd have services that would be much more compassionate, much more sensitive to the lives that people have lived, rather than these kind of often quite oppressive regimes that are, well, you don't deserve much because of what you've done.
And it's so Victorian, isn't it? I mean, it really, really is. It's just,
it's not
I'm a bit ranty about it.
It's not a vote winner, is it? We want to pump money. You get the votes if you pump money into the NHS and into schools. You talk about pumping money into prison. It's like, no, because we all like othering, it makes,
absolutely.
I think it makes people feel better if they sit comfy thinking, I'm good and I'm healthy because I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
But by contrast, I am therefore good and healthy. They're bad and sick. I'm not.
And that goes back to that survival, doesn't it? That we are these chemical beings and our only job is to survive. So if you are better than that other person, then, oh, then you're going to get better offspring and you're going to survive a little bit better. I know I'm being really basic, but I've got a bit of bee in my bonnet about this at the moment. This little chemical box theory. But you know, that is, isn't it? Well, then I'm not as bad as you, so therefore I'm doing better. So then I am more likely to survive. And do you think that when the environment and the world becomes very threatening, do you think that that makes us more wanting to survive? So can that make us, in fact, a bit more violent because we got to survive?
It's our primary drive, isn't it? If you, I mean, I guess different people have different beliefs and views, but if we are tolerant of some of the ideas around evolution, particularly, then, you know, we are biological beings, and we are destined to pass our DNA on. A successful, you know, a successful animal passes their DNA onto a subsequent generation. Now, to do that, you've got to survive first.
Yeah.
So the first kind of directive for us as biological animals is you've got to survive till you've reached a reproductive age. You have to do that. So, you know, people will rely on whatever they need to rely on to do that. Most people are fortunate that actually they find themselves in an environment where they don't have to do much because other people have got their back. But not everybody has. If nobody's got your back, you're going to learn to scrap pretty quick. You know, and once you can't unlearn stuff. You know, once you've learned that people are dangerous, there's so many people I work with in therapy. Therapeutic, that's the other thing I think we do a lot of in CFT, is we spend a lot of time thinking about what's it like for you to sit with me. You know, what's it like? I've got all this power. I might write reports about you. I've got a set of keys, you know, all this kind of stuff. You know, to explore what it means to sit in a room with somebody who has enormous power over you. What's that like for you? Because actually your experience of that might be pretty crap. And I guess conversely, sometimes there is, you know, and actually, what do I need to do if you start to get really cross with me? You know, how do I make sure I duck, kind of thing, you know? But having those explicit conversations with people about how do we make this work together? We're both bringing something to this relationship. That's quite new. That's quite unusual, I think, in forensic settings.
You know, John, I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, as have you, David, haven't you? We both attended a lecture that John gave, and you know, you are everything that you say you are in terms of your work. You are incredibly passionate about it, and I think you make a bloody difference, if I'm honest. And you know, because if we look at it, every person that walks into that prison, you know, that the judge has given the amazing speech and, oh, ha, ha, you know, that bloody old age tradition of banging and whatever it is that they like to do. They're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter, they're somebody's father, sister, aunt, uncle, brother, cousin. They are somebody's husband.
Yeah.
They are somebody's something. And I do hypnobirthing, so I get a real little rush when I teach people hypnobirthing, so they can have a really lovely, you know, choice of birth, how they're going to go with that. And I always say to them, you know what, on the day when your baby is born, that is its birthday. Now, you're going to spend a lot of money on birthday parties and planning them, okay? So really plan this one. Thousands. I flew my daughter to God, where did I fly her to? Oh, somewhere in Switzerland, Geneva, yeah, for her 21st, for dinner. Okay, she's spoiled. I love her. So, but when that baby, that first day, that's the birthday. That's the one where you are actually going to physically meet your little bean and all the potential. Nobody has a baby and then looks at it and says, oh, right, yeah, well, you're definitely going to be an X, Y, and Z. That massive potential. And I think that if we lose sight of that as a society, if we, like you say, other them, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, people don't choose their genes and people don't choose their early life experiences, you know. So to make people feel blamed for that is kind of counterproductive. And I think, you know, in the work that's particularly the kind of work that I've tried to develop with Carenza, that it's not like we let people off the hook. We invite people to take responsibility for what they've done. You know, what we hope to do is to ensure that people have the resilience to do that, so that people are ready to turn towards the distress they've caused. Because if you ask people to do that too soon, you just re-traumatize. You just re-traumatize people. And I think that's been the problem in forensic services, that people are re-traumatized, you know, regularly. I don't know if you've seen I can't remember what it's called now. Is it called Time? The Sean Bean.
Yeah.
Three-part thing. I mean, that was very powerful. You know, very powerful illustration of what's it like to step into a prison, you know, and then start to realize just how frightened you are, you know. And in CFT terms, your threat system's on permanent.
Yeah.
And your threat system means you're in fight-flight mode.
Yeah.
You know. So how do we?
I think it was more impactful because he hadn't got the tools, had he?
No, not at all. No. And look how quickly he had to use violence. Look how quickly to survive. And it worked. You know, most of the people I've worked with in my career who have been violent, when they started to use violence, they found out it protected them more than anything else they'd ever tried.
Yeah.
You know, so of course they learn it. Now we have to do something about that, because it's not okay to be violent, you know, but let's at least recognize why you had to learn that, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's what helps people to shift more, I think.
Well, you know what, David and I always say, don't we, David? we could talk all day, and probably over the weekend and next week, but definitely not in August.
No.
I'd like to add that we don't totally shut down in August, John.
No.
I am still working. It's just this we don't do in August.
Wait too late. You can't backtrack on that one now.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Trying to redeem myself now.
You are beyond redemption there, Buckler.
I would say it is no more than an act of self-compassion, that's all.
And more of it. You know, John, sorry, David.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say I am going to think about my own compassion a little bit more, a lot more. Yeah.
Because that's one of the biggest things, and maybe you'd come back again another time, John, and actually talk about self-compassion, because God, it's a bugger, isn't it? I mean, hold your hands up. It's a bugger. It's really easy to talk about it towards other people, but for ourselves, well, that's always the...
And people, you know, people don't want to hear this, but when you work, again, with people who've caused harm, their blocks to self-compassion because of what they've done are very, very substantial. And people don't recognise that. They're again, this idea that you put people behind bars and they're just remorseless savages, you know, it couldn't be further from the truth. It really couldn't. There are some people who are very, very harmful, very dangerous, and maybe never can grow or cultivate the capacities to live safely. You know, I have no problem saying that, you know, but most can, you know, and they need to be given an opportunity that's fair and reasonable, and shows them, gives them what they've not had.
And you seem to do that, John.
Sometimes, yeah. I can be pretty crap sometimes as well. You know,
and that's probably why you're good, because you recognise that you can be pretty crap sometimes as well.
One of the beauties of working in forensic services is people are often not shy to tell you.
Not people pleasing as such.
No.
Okay, well, we are going to have to end this conversation, as much as we would love to continue with it. David, for the finale of this season, and yes, we're back in September with some very interesting guests that have already been pre-booked. But David, my love, talk us out for your fans.
Okay, here's me talking us out for us all. I'll see you in September again. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much, John. We could have gone on forever. That is really fascinating. So thank you again for being with us, and thank you, Aneesh, for being you. And
didn't have anybody else to bring with
we'll
me.
Talk very soon. No, that's true.
Right. Bye.
So thank you, and bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.